All righty, so we're beginning. Well, George, thanks so much for joining us again. We've had many, many requests from our viewers and listeners to get your take on what's going on. And you've been globe-trotting, and you have dialogue going on in every part of the world about how to respond to this fiasco that's going on right now. Before I get into specifics, can you just give us your take from what you're seeing right now? I know it's challenging, and this is not to be construed as advice, but it's your observation on what's going on.
Well, the observation is the whole economic system. The monopoly game is becoming very apparent to people, that it's coming apart at the seams, and there's how can you borrow more money yourself to go into debt further if there's no money available to borrow? So you can't create it out of thin air. And right now we have Congress trying to get together and create the Treasury. But who's backing up the Treasury? So we have the same problem of these guarantees that's happening because of the derivatives, which I've talked to you
yes, and I want
before.
To go into that in great detail in a moment. Go ahead. Yes.
Well, what is happening is the world meltdown is, and all of these guys that were sitting in New York City or in Washington, either way, that were working on creating these vehicles for people to put their money into. So they have a so-called safety flag up there. That's a guarantee, or whatever you want to call it, that their money's going to be safe. The problem is that people forget that the stock market is risk. They forget that their pension funds are in risk. And frankly, probably half of the pension funds in the United States got wiped out, or pretty close to 50% of it, just in the last few days.
Yeah.
That means that people's retirement account are gone. They're going to have to address it. Now, the Congress has put together programs supposedly to allow you to write off and put in other words, not pay taxes on money, to put it into an investment account, risk capital again. And all of these deals were just delays of the monopoly game coming apart right now. And unfortunately, I do talk to people around the world, and it's happening all over the planet right now. I just got notice from a couple of suppliers from China, said that they will not take the dollar anymore for their goods. Well, what's that going to do to people like Walmart?
Right.
Which,
yes.
You understand?
Oh, yes.
And I'm advising people, if they have any cash right now, frankly, is to go out, look at the appliances that you have in your house that are 8 or 10 years old, that could go out and go buy them, because the stores are so screaming for cash right now. They have enormous deals on these things, basically less than the production cost. And that will be able to go ahead and do this, because before long there won't be any of these available.
Okay, so we're getting to such a meltdown point where the whole system is going to stop in terms of manufacturing, exports, and so forth. Okay, let me ask you this. I mean, I want to get back to this whole issue of derivatives for a moment, because I've read a number of different reports, and one of them, very bluntly, by Ellen Brown, was called, "It's the Derivatives, Stupid." And so I've never understood derivatives. In an attempt to do so, I got some really basic definitions. And here's a part of one definition, George, which maybe you can give us: derivatives for dummies. It says, unlike financial instruments such as stocks and bonds, a derivative is usually a contract rather than an asset. Essentially, this means you buy a promise to convey ownership of the asset rather than the asset itself. Well, this seems rather broad and very confusing. And according to one report I read, it says the face value amount of derivatives held by the U.S. commercial banks at present is $180 trillion. Another report, in Ellen's report, she says the outstanding derivative amount is closer to a quadrillion, which is it's 10 times and maybe 20 times more than the entire gross domestic product of the planet. What does this mean? What are derivatives? What does this mean?
Well, the definition you said is pretty close. I tried to explain this before in the same way. Let's say that you had your house, and we'll make it simple. You had your house that you bought it, but your friend down the street decided that they would like an option to buy that. They want an option. They're not buying the house or anything. And you've agreed on a price to do that. So what they've done is given you an option. They don't own the house, they don't have anything, and you've received some money to be able to sell it to them. Now, what that option's worth? Now the next question is, if they turned around and said, no, I got a better deal because I'm in this to flip it, I will find somebody else to buy my option. So they've raised the price on it. Now what they've done and is done exactly the same thing, is sold it to somebody else. Now a pool of investment geniuses in New York decided, hey, now let's do this even better. We got people that will insure this, that it'll work. So they create these insurance companies that say, well, we will insure the option. Now, there's an old saying, figures don't lie, but liars figure.
Yeah.
Okay? The problem is nobody, and as long as look, I'm an underwriter, I have never found an accountant that can tell me what the value of a derivative is. Now, that has been because of the insurance game. They have laid this off around the planet to banks all over, to people, to savings, retirement funds, and everything else, to buy derivatives as an asset, because supposedly, from a historical standpoint, everything keeps going up in price. And so how do you offset this inflation factor? And that's been done by these derivatives. Now, the dollars they're talking about, they don't exist.
Right. So
they don't exist.
So what is yeah. Go ahead.
What you're going to look at is a total meltdown of our system, if at all possible. I mean, Kennedy was going to do this, as you know, go back to have our Treasury issue dollars on its own. Well, we have to bankrupt the whole situation. I mean, California's looking at bankruptcy right now.
Right.
You're looking at, that's what is it, 13th or 14th largest country in the world economically in one state, and yet every city, every town, everybody is looking at economic things, and they're unloading totally because of the illusion of equity,
right.
The illusion of what their house is worth, the illusion of all these. And I've been talking about this for years right now for people. So what can you really do? The advice is, and I just did this myself, is go to the bank and get us $1,000 or $2,000 if you have the money available in small bills, 1s, 5s, 10s, and 20s. How many banks are closing up?
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. How many banks are going to be closing up from what you're saying? Well, let me ask you about this. Now, with this vote before the Senate today on this, they call it the rescue vote or the bailout. One of the let's see. It says the measure the Senate will take up tonight includes temporarily raising the limit on federal deposit insurance (FDIC) to $250,000 from $100,000. How is that even possible? When
doesn't make any difference because FDIC is broke already.
They're broke, exactly. So this is all just smoke and mirrors to create public perception, so the public can get behind this.
How many people do you know have $20,000 in the bank?
Yeah.
See what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You may have a business account and may be floating in those numbers, but these big dollars that they're talking, they can say, oh, this is okay. It doesn't mean anything. This is smoke and mirrors, like you and I are talking. It's just smoke and mirrors again. Will that vote? My sources are telling me that the public across the United States, this is as we're speaking, are unanimously against rescuing Wall Street.
Yes.
They're against it. It's basically 2-1. Now, these people are out notifying their congressmen and representatives and everything of what their feelings are. Now, how many are bought and paid for? Well, you're going to know at the end of the day, and you got Paulson and the rest of them who are not elected officials. They're appointed by the Bush, consortium.
Yes.
And what they're doing now is trying to ram something down to get you the illusion that everything's okay. It's not. Houses are still going down in value. People are not able to borrow to buy a house right now. The banks have basically shut down the credit. The motor companies, Ford, General Motors, and all that, they're basically shut down for buying anything. I'm predicting that even Sears and Kmart will go back into bankruptcy by the end of the year because they're not even announcing what their sales are.
It looks like yesterday my father was telling me as he was following some numbers about the only stock that went up was Campbell's Soup. Now, what does this say?
No, what it tells you, the smart money, the old saying is there's needs and wants, right?
Right.
You may want things, but what do you really need? Well, you need food.
Right.
So people that are inside are saying, hey, I'm going to Campbell Soup, or I'm going to some of the food companies or oil companies because you need energy.
Right.
So that is one of the areas that are looking for an investment. As long as the stock market continues to function, I'm predicting at some point they'll shut down the stock market. Because the stock market absolutely represents nothing. I wish people would understand stocks are just traded between people and have brokers in between. Once a stock is issued by a company, it's a legal crapshoot, frankly. That's all it is. It has no bearing. You don't have any voting rights. You may have, but they don't count. 60% of all the stocks are owned by what? Pension funds and mutual funds. And the mutual fund, if somebody owns a mutual fund, say, hey, I'm fine. They don't realize there's 3 steps in that. You do not own a stock. You own a share of a mutual fund, which owns the stocks. So the manager of the mutual fund, who by law, they have to put this in a custodian bank. What if the custodian bank goes in bankruptcy? You understand?
Yeah.
And then we have the mutual fund manager. He doesn't know what's going on, and he can't find some other mutual funds to buy the stocks that he has. And that's what's happening with all the hedge funds and the rest of it. It's all going to come unwound, including people's retirement accounts and any way they look at it. And the advice is to make yourself liquid. Now, the liquidity, and look, I'm talking to foreign bankers this morning, and they say the only thing that we know that we're doing, we're moving it a small amount into the dollar. That's the reason why I'm saying keep a few dollars around, because when you go down to buy a loaf of bread, they still will recognize it for a while. And then they're putting it into other currencies. Now, what are the currencies? You have to do research on it, which ones are strong. Even the euro's going down. I mean, Germany announced that they won't take euros from 6 other countries, including Italy and France and Spain.
We talked about this last time. What exactly does that mean? I mean, how are they to pay their debts?
Well, that's what people are doing. You're going to go back to being trading. Mm-hmm. You're going to trade your corn for a piece of meat or a chicken or whatever, eggs. People are going to have to learn how to barter, frankly. Mm-hmm. And this is going to be worse than 29 in the United States, but the rest of the world's involved. The people I talk to in other countries, like I say this morning, even the ones that I was at the Silver Conference, which was a couple weeks ago, which is the president and CEO of the largest silver mines in the world, were here. And they're all discussing the problems of the environmental impact, and they're having this in the United States. They're basically shutting down the mines because they can't afford the EPA requirements, and we are killing the planet off too. So we have all these things to stay into balance. That's the problem. Everything's coming to a head. I'm watching the Global 2000 agenda, because how do they get you away from what's going on? They don't report about a war right now. All they do is talk about Afghanistan. But I still say that they're going to get a war started, whether it's right now or in the next 3 or 4 months, whoever the new president's going to take it over. But it's possible that Bush could go ahead and start one within the next 2 weeks or so, and which basically would suspend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and stop all this malarkey.
When you say stop all this malarkey, what does that mean?
What it amounts to is we will then become a police state. There will be, and they've made it so that our military, we actually have a division of the military in the United States that's prepared to come in to assist cities during this martial law, if you will look at it.
Now, is this going to be in direct response to economic meltdown, do you think?
Well, sure. Basically China said this is what the chairman of China said. He says if the dollar collapses, we will consider that an act of war.
Well, okay.
And China and Russia right now are doing their war exercises against their, quote, common enemy. Right now, they got Chinese ships as well as Russian ships in Venezuela down there to protect them because of the oil assets.
So I'm sorry, listen, just once again, China, if our economy goes down, China will consider it an aggressive act, an act of war?
That's what they're saying. And their chairman told Bush, basically, they said, you don't know how many nuclear bombs we have. I mean, the Russians, we do know.
Right.
They've admitted that, but they've stopped all the treaties that they had going on. So we have a problem that is going to escalate, because the number one problem, as I was checking the other day, we have 6.8 billion people on the planet, and increasing over deaths about 200,000 a day, or 5 million a month. Mm-hmm. There's not enough resources around the planet in order to take care of the people. So meanwhile, we have created this, again, the ultimate meltdowns are going to happen all over the planet. Not only are we going to have a meltdown economically, we're going to have a meltdown in the price of food and everything else. I was with the man who owns a chain of supermarkets of the day, and he says expect 40 to 50% increase in cost of your fruits and vegetables in the next 3 or 4 months, regardless of what they do in Washington.
Okay, so, I mean, as you're speaking, of course, this has become a global affair. I mean, the European Central Bank president has basically is telling the U.S. you must do something to bail this out because otherwise we're going to have problems throughout the global financial system. So they're strong-arming the Senate and the House to pass some sort of bailout so that they can continue. Now, they just had how many bank failures in this last week in Europe?
Oh, I don't have the number, but the big ones that went on over there. Well, our government just got through advancing another $40 billion over there. This is all done in the last few days.
And I heard they're looking for another 400 in bailouts in Europe as well for their banking
industry.
Well,
the trouble is with the euro, they don't have a central bank type thing, so they can't bail it out. Remember, that was a consortium of countries that got together in order to create this new money system. That's like China and Japan are trying to get together right now, believe it or not, because they don't want to take the dollar, so they want to create one. Iran started the bourse. Maybe you remember they cut all the cables, so that stopped that. The bourse was a new currency to keep track of the exchange of oil, because there are three currencies in the world, and that's oil, gold, and drugs. Well, Afghanistan is all drugs. I mean, that's the largest of, the opium fields in the world. So we've got some real problems on how do we address the people themselves to understand that the game is coming apart and everything that we dreamed about. I mean, obviously go back to sleep and say, hey, this is real fun. And that's what they're counting on. Yet you're not going to have any food. You better get some food stored up. I'm serious. It's getting pretty drastic.
Well, now, okay, let's this whole notion of one of the reports I was reading, just looking at the stock market, this is a traditional take on it. One of the pundits on Bloomberg.com illustrating what you're saying. They're expecting the stock market here, for example, to go down below $5,000. Silver, in spite of the what should be a huge demand for it, is really not picking up. Gold's about the only thing, as you say. Gold, drugs, and oil. Is that what you said?
Yeah, and get a load of gold today. This is on the 1st of October. The Canadian government announced they're not making any more maple leafs. And you can call any coin dealer. I just talked to them this morning because I've got orders to buy some gold, from some of my people. There's virtually none available. I mean, there's some trickling in and out. There are a couple of people bought 5,000 ounces of gold, the last of it coming in from Canada. And we're 5,000 ounces, as you know, today is about $930 an ounce. Well, that's what you're paying over spot. In other words, to buy it, it's about $930. And yet the spot price is $878, but there's none out there. So it's being manipulated by the gold funds, and you don't know whether or not they even have it there. That comes back to another derivative. These people have laid off options and consider those being gold. So at some point, this is all going to come apart, and the people have physical, the gold and silver. The silver right now, delivery is 4 to 5 weeks out. There's plenty of silver available. There's like 5 months of supply of the physical silver for the world. It's the fabricated product. In other words, the 1 ounce rounds or that type of stuff that you want to buy because it'll be easy to trade. I was with the people over there that are fabricating this stuff. Both of the two largest mints over here, that's Sunshine, which makes the blanks for the American Eagle, as well as Northwestern. They're telling me that it's about 4 to 5 weeks for delivery if I was to buy 1,000 rounds, for instance.
Okay.
So that we can get it. It just takes a little while to get it, and I'm urging if somebody not to buy stocks and gold, mines, and all the rest of it, that's going to be a game going away. Get physical. Even if you have to buy the option to get that, an option again is you've bought the thing, they've got it on deposit, they're just fabricating it.
Okay, so gold, obviously, you're saying the price is being artificially suppressed on gold. I mean, theoretically.
Well, they don't want. Sure, they want to keep people to keep their eye on the stock market as they manipulate it. Look at how can these stocks go up one day or down 777 points and then come back up 500 one day, right?
Exactly.
Well, that's the plunge committee, the 8 members on the floor of the stock exchange that are members of basically the Federal Reserve and the administration that are to keep the stock market from plunging. The markets that you're talking about, the dropping, I predicted it to be way down in the 8,500s some time ago. So, it's a question of what's the real value. I got out of the stock market when the market was at 3,500 and dropped 20% in one day.
Right.
And then the next day, that's when the feds send a letter to me. They loan me all the money to maintain the market. In other words, be basically a market maker.
Right.
Well, a lot of us went out of business and said, why would you want to do that when we know the stocks in itself, if you analyze it from a actuary base, it wasn't worth it. Well, I don't pick a company up here. Are they worth anything? None of them pay any dividends. They don't do anything. It's just a created, 100 shares traded in a stock. For instance, another illustration, United Airlines a week ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
It went to $1 a share in one day.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the next day it came back. How did that happen? Well, 100 shares traded at $1, and so that determined the value of the stock for the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
You understand that people understand the whole stock market's that way. They only needed a couple shares to manipulate the game, and somebody that's playing with Mickey Mouse money, i.e. the Federal Reserve's Mickey Mouse money.
So then the wild roller coaster ride of the stock market the last couple of weeks, you're saying this is primarily manufactured by the Federal Reserve, by a handful of individuals, again, to keep this thing from really dropping where it should be? Or is the public itself participating in this and a certain amount of panic dropping it where it should be?
Well, no, the public doesn't have a clue what's happening. Most of them will go and say this is okay, this is happening. No, it's a manipulation game to bail out the banks.
Mm-hmm.
If they can drop all the stocks down into in other words, basically what's happened in the last 3 days, over $1 trillion worth of stock value went down, right?
Right.
So what happens if you take like Goldman Sachs and whatever, they say, okay, we're selling out everything and the market all drops down in 2 days, drops down $1 trillion.
Right.
So the guy said, wait a minute, we can get back some of our losses. So the insiders then do what? They acquire the stock and run it back up 500 points. And they sell it at the 500 points.
Well, now, what about Warren Buffett's $5 billion infusion into Goldman Sachs?
Well, but he didn't buy he's in buying he can see the asset value of what he's doing. I mean, Buffett's not a dummy. They're not just sitting down. He's loaning money against the assets on it, a loan.
Uh-huh.
Now, people that have cash loan it. You don't sit down there and buy it unless you have total control, and that's happening too. You notice how some of these companies are overnight, over the weekend, all of a sudden, they're being acquired by banks. How does this happen when you have board of directors and all this other stuff happen? Well,
right.
What they're doing is rape, like they did the S&L fiasco.
Yeah.
When all the savings alone went under. I mean, the assets were sold to the insiders for 30 cents on the dollar, and the American public take it on. Well, right now, the American public doesn't have any money.
Right.
There isn't any more taxing coming out of here because you don't have the jobs. The truth is, I think we're at probably 11 to 12% unemployment across the country.
In real numbers.
In real numbers. And that's going to really escalate right now because people are just not buying things. Our whole economy is based on buying and selling things.
Well, what about looking at on the level of consciousness as conscious and sovereign human beings who might be waking up to the story that not all is as it seems? What about the notion of mass, collective consciousness creating a fear scenario that allows all of this to take place? Now we're getting into, I know we're getting into another entire area, but it's one that you are familiar with. So.
Oh, of course, and I'm not talking about fear. Logic says that we have to be aware of things that are happening around us.
Yes.
Logic says that the knowledge that we have is only on base what the media has been given to us. So what if we wake up and find out that what the media is given to us is a lie? Well, the logic says that we better take care of and correct the lie for our own self, because the only one that's going to protect me is me.
Right.
The only one that's going to protect you is the same thing, and the knowledge that you get in order to adjust to say, wait a minute, this lie has been perpetuated for, eons of time, frankly, up to this point for global world control. I mean, the 9/11 fiasco, which allows, all of these special right giveaways programs from our rights are set up on there, along with all of this world commotion that they're putting together right now. Also, you have to put together, some of it's all true, and you have to look at the world situation. Where are all the supplies? Where is all the gold? You can forget about Fort Knox, the gold's someplace else. And if you've seen the video, loose change, for instance, too, you saw a lot of gold was underneath the Twin Towers. What happened to that?
Right.
These are the things that people are not aware of. because they're hoping that there's going to be 534 or 530 people up in Washington that are going to take care of them.
Yeah.
The trouble is, they're already bought and paid for. I've said this many times. Politics is two words. Folly is many, and ticks are bloodsuckers.
Right, right. Well, let's look if you want to expand out just for a moment again. What do you see actually happening then regarding Russia and China's position in the world? A couple of weeks ago, I was reading that the Chinese stock market was in terrible shape as well. What's going on?
Well, the unwinding of the possibilities. If China cannot export their goods, then they've been created. They went along some of the scenario we do, create enormous amounts of debt, get everybody into houses and everything else. They're having a housing problem too. Remember, the Chinese basically the country over there runs different.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, they have a lot of people are walking away from the houses. The successful places like Home Depot and everything, because in the Chinese, when they're building up all their condos, for instance, in Beijing, and I've been over there,
mm-hmm.
they give them the four walls, but they don't finish inside.
Mm-hmm.
So these people go over to the equivalent of Walmart and go in, or not Walmart, but Home Depot, etc., and get all their parts and finish them all up. And they, too, have found ways to borrow money. Now, the borrowing money has made it so they're starting to go through the foreclosure rate. Now, because there's so many people there, 1,300,000,000, which is about 4.5 times our population, the effect is that there's those that have and those that do not. Meanwhile, the same game. If the United States doesn't buy it, and that's been the trigger again, the monopoly game of the movie they see, the United States is doing so well. The trouble is that we're not. We've been consuming all these goods on debt.
Right.
We don't make anything anymore. I mean, the world went to pieces 2 weeks ago when Hershey Candy Company announced that it's moving all of its plants to Mexico for manufacturing of Hershey bars.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's been over then, right?
That's it, yeah. What about Russia?
Well, Russia is an interesting scenario. Putin's no dummy, and they have the energy and the mineral resources, and they're so huge, as you know. There are more billionaires in Moscow, for instance, than any other city in the world. It's the old Communist Manifesto: feign weakness as they grow strong.
Right.
Their space program is way ahead of us. Their nuclear program is way ahead of us. I mean, they actually reprocess their nuclear waste. Mm-hmm. We're still finding ways to do with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our government's doing nothing about that. But if all of them got together and started the nuclear programs, it would be probably 10 years away before we had 2% of the energy requirements. So we're kind of stuck. Mm-hmm. The United States is still importing about 70% of its oil from other countries. Mm-hmm. We even get some, as you know, from Mexico and Canada.
Right.
And then what's happening in Canada, enormous problems with the oil that we're getting down there, not the oil itself, but the environment. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with Mexico. Mexico, according to my oil friends in Washington, says that they'll probably be out of oil within 4 years. Mm-hmm. But they're exporting 30% of their oil to us, and yet they're importing 40% of their oil from Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a game now where everybody's making a little bit of money. Now, how you put the pieces all together and how you can take care of yourself, the best thing you can do is get into a small town if you can. California's, and I keep getting this as a hint that they're all getting prepared now for some major event out in California, i.e. Maybe an earthquake or some other thing or something similar like that.
What is the indication? What are you hearing?
Well, I'm hearing within the next 2 or 3 weeks there may be a big earthquake in California.
Okay.
And there's other people that's monitoring the sites, and I haven't pulled up the geological. You can pull up California earthquakes and on the internet, and you can see how many. There's 1,000 of them a day occurring. But a lot of the psychics that are in contact with us saying they're expecting something major out there. Well, technically, a lot of major things are happening up there. You have a country, California, where the tax system's all upside down. Mm-hmm. It's going to be very interesting.
So back to what we can do, whether we're in California or elsewhere in both in the United States and even elsewhere in the world, for all people who essentially, well, let me read this one little email because I think this is so indicative of what's going on out there. It actually in more advantageous conditions. My parents this is from a viewer of ours. My parents recently sold some land, and they have a few $100,000 sitting in the bank. Having both lived through the Depression in the 1930s, they've lived very meagerly their whole lives. Now that they finally have some money in their pocket, I would feel it would be criminal for it to wither away through the collapse of the dollar and the stock market. How do we, the average person of the world, and say a situation like that, again, this is not intended as advice, but just your take on this. How do we deal with this now if we didn't listen 2 years ago?
Well, believe it or not, like EverBank in Florida is an interesting city. It's a $1 billion bank, but they're taking people's deposits and then putting them into a basket of currencies.
No, that's still good? That's still good right now?
Oh, sure. Okay. Sure. It's still going. And I was talking to people in Panama. I asked, the largest bank in Panama, the people that are involved with that. And they themselves are, they take the dollars, and I says, as long as you'll take them, and they'll convert it to some other currency. And then, of course, they're recommending then if you can acquire some gold. It's very secure to have a few pieces of gold in your mattress, frankly.
Yeah.
That's just one of the games. It's a storage of wealth.
Right.
It's not that you're going to get rich, because that game is over. It's wherever you're at right now. It's not a game of making money on other people. It's going to be a question of survival, and that's what the government's got all set up now, is how do we mobilize and take care of the 300 million people that we have, since half of them are over age 50.
Right.
The pension funds are all going away. There won't be any Social Security. You talk about scare things. I had people call me yesterday. Their pension fund has gone down half.
Yeah.
Their retirement fund. I said, well, you could have been like an airline pilot. What happened to them? They lost all their pension funds.
Yeah.
So these are things we have to look at. And the parents that's worked so long and they sold some property, bless them. They've got some cash. Now that cash can go to be worthless. I mean, I have a daughter who lives in Washington, D.C., and they were sitting in the same boat. They were working. They had a plush job for the last 20 years and making lots of money. All of a sudden, it all come to a head. Now, what did they do? They have monthly payments of $10,000 a month, right?
Yeah.
This is affecting them. All that they've accumulated is going to go away. Now, that is scary. They said, "Al, how do we get rid of this stuff?" I said, "It's pretty tough because the banks aren't making loans."
Right. So let's go back to that cash scenario you're talking about. Okay, the dollar loses value in the world market, but is the dollar still worth, and again, we have to adjust for, as you said, 40 to 50% inflation on the cost of food and so forth. Given all of that, is it still a good idea to have some of that paper around to be able to continue operating?
Well, that's what I'm telling you. Go to the bank. Hey, look, I went to Bank of America, and I said I wanted $2,500 in ones, 5s, 10s, and 20s.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want anything more than that because you're going to have change, right?
Right.
And so, believe it or not, I took all the cash that they had at $2,500 out of this one Bank of America place. That's all they had. They had more 50s and 100s. But if you go out of this country, they won't take 50s and 100s anymore.
Right. Right.
So you're right back to the same point. We're playing with pieces of paper. Mm-hmm. We have to make them to use, and as long as people are willing to accept them, go for it. Meanwhile, look at what you can do to store up for things that you might be able to trade for.
Yes.
That's what you look at. And that's where, some of the books out, like, Patriots and a couple other ones, which goes into how to set up bartering things. And look at these barter clubs that are setting up. I even got cities that are setting up positions where several people are growing certain crops and they all agree to share with them. It's kind of like a big co-op to get away from the money situation.
Yeah, I can see that. That's of great value.
Well, that's a good, and not necessarily to, go to a city that's totally off the grid, like a couple of them that are out north of Taos, for instance, they're totally off the grid. Mm-hmm. That's really great, but they made themselves targets. You want to live in community. But the biggest problem is the big cities. And then you have the other problem, people's health, right?
Right. A lot of people are not able to take care of their payment each month now on their HMOs.
Well, but even so, that's another insurance policy, and they quit paying on a lot of the benefits on those.
That's true.
Insurance is a guarantee that people are looking for to somebody to take care of them. What we're going to have to do is say, we better find out what's causing all this thing. Why is the medical profession up in the air right now? because of all of what's going on with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of these, like you said, HMOs and all these health benefits, because of the supposed cost for health care. And the health care things, that's another one of these games where people have been playing. There are a lot of ways to get people back into health that not necessarily using the highway. And I don't have any problem with, yesterday I was talking to a doctor, an MD, in fact, a famous doctor, and we were discussing using, again, silver and stuff for, getting rid of a lot of diseases. And they can do it. And, this doctor, his book is in every health food store, for instance, and it lives down in California also. But these are things that we have to look at and say, hey, what kind of disease do I have? How did we develop it? It's probably because of the chemicals and stuff that we've been absorbing through all of the foods yesterday or today, right? It's all mandatory that the foods will be that it will be labeled on where they come from, what country, whatever they are. It's still not necessary for them to label that they're radiated, however.
Right.
And that's a bad deal. Some of them are putting on as cold pasteurization, and radiation continues on down the food chain, no matter what.
So really, I mean, we're getting back to basics in terms of we should be eating locally, we should be eating organically, we should start understanding we have to begin taking care of ourselves on many, many levels, and our health is number one. I mean, we interviewed a wonderful man named Raymond Francis, for example, who wrote a book, Never Be Sick Again, who saved himself. And again, he's saying the same thing. Don't look to the medical industry. So I think that message is loud and clear. If we want to retain our health, we need to take care of ourselves.
Well, we have a new book that we got Mr. Anderson down in Los Angeles put out a book called Rave. And basically, in the book, it's a dietary thing, and you have a DVD and everything else, and shows that how you can get rid of all these things we have, cancers and all the rest of this stuff.
Yes, and this is essential. And what is Mr. Anderson's first name?
I think it's Richard, isn't it? I believe it is.
Okay, well, we'll start looking for Rave, R-A-V-E?
Yeah, it's on our catalog. I have it on there, yeah.
Okay, so we'll start
looking. Oh, his name is Mike Anderson. Mike
Anderson, okay.
Yeah, and anyway, his video, and he has many doctors and everything testifying to the information that he puts out.
Okay.
And it's up on my website because we're pushing it for people to look at. But it basically gets you away from the medical profession. It's not that if you don't have a broken arm, you want to go get it set and everything, but it does give you some understandings of what we're doing to ourselves.
Yes, which is essential. We have to take responsibility for that and for each other. And we've talked about this in the last segments. We're going to have to come back together again. Now, I wanted to just get to a couple more currency issues here. What's happening in Britain right now? We're hearing about the better part of Europe, but what's happening in Britain with the pound and all?
Well, the central bank up there is rescuing rock and the rest of them. In other words, the banks are trying to keep some kind of stability of their currency going, because the pound has always been, fairly the rock. Hey, look, 1900, Britain ruled the world at that time, right? Mm-hmm. It really did.
Yep, short bit ago. Mm-hmm.
It's not that long ago. Okay, up to this point, we have become the most powerful nation in the world because of the economic and willing to use military things. I mean, look at us. We're the only ones that's used nuclear, for instance, against any other country. And we're also acting as a police force. I mean, our military is in I don't know how many countries now, 100 and some countries. What are we acting as? A police force to keep our program going? Actually, it comes back to the few families to keep that's using the energy and the military-industrial complex to control the world, because ultimately that's what you come back to.
Right. Very true.
It's like Aaron Russo's movie, From Freedom to Fascism.
Yes.
And we, people that get a book from us, we send them out a free copy if they ask it of that, because I want everybody to look at what Aaron.
Yes, and we have one of the only interviews with him on our site. Before he passed away, actually, he spoke with us, and it's an excellent intimate talk with him about all of this, in addition to the DVD and the book.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. There are people out trying. There are people out there like yourselves trying to get the truth out to the people. And look, I honor your commitment. I honor you putting the information out for the people, and I honor your listeners willing to take the stand to go investigate. Don't believe what I have to say. Go out and investigate, because that puts you in a position of being responsible to find out what the truth of the matter, and also to be responsible for yourself and your friends. And right now it's time to get together with other people of like minds to support each other.
It is indeed, and it is very confounding to people. As a friend of mine said the other night, what is a person to do? I work for the state, I do my job, I pay my bills, and I have trusted them to invest for me because I don't understand these markets in terms of her pension plan, right? And this is the state of California, by the way. And what do you say to people in this situation?
Unfortunately, that's part of the programming going to school. I mean, we've dumbed down the whole system. You've been programmed to go learn a certain field, for instance. I mean, I went to College School of Mines. I studied engineering. I also, however, went to University of Illinois, where I studied law and business, and then I got in the game, the real world of monopoly. Then you start looking at people and say, well, I'm going to grow up to be a nurse, or I'm going to grow up to be whatever you're going to be. That's all you know. And so it's really easy to say, I don't have time enough because I want to go fishing. I want to go do these other things without spending the time. I mean, that's all. So, I mean, there's books written on it, on how to take over the society, that get everybody interested in sports, get everybody interested in the entertainment. And so you're entertained. I mean, you're totally comfortable now. Hey, Sunday, I'm going to watch the football game. Now you spend your 3 or 4 hours, watching, or 8 hours watching the TV, watching a game where somebody else is playing out there. It's kind of like, the Roman gladiators, if you know.
Yes.
And we're looking at the fall of the Roman Empire all over again. Actually, we're looking at planet Earth in such major dire straits. I'm getting a lot of documents right now about planet Mars, which was an inhabited planet.
Yes. We just did an interview on that, actually, yes.
Did you?
Yep.
And with all the documents I have, these are all government documents that I'm getting put together. We'll be able to show that it was, but we disintegrated it. Now, the same thing's going to happen to us. And there are, as you know, groups of extraterrestrials that are hoping that this does happen because they want the resources on the planet.
Yes.
And so we are nothing more than expendable containers on the larger picture.
Yes, and then there's evidence that there are other factions of beings from other places who are here, in essence, to guide and help us through this as well. But without
Exactly.
a heavy hand of interference, they're trying to do it in every way they can. I mean, certainly, I think most people listening to this will accept that we are not the only intelligent life in the universe, and that we have been a part of a larger species, whether we've been consciously aware of it or not, since we got here, since we came into being. So we should stop the hysteria over all of that. We have those trying to exploit us, we have those trying to help us, but ultimately I think what's happened, I mean, it seems to me that humanity, I mean, I can certainly say this for the United States, has been lulled into this extended sense of adolescence, where we have been made to believe that we are going to be taken care of, and the game's up. We're not going to be taken care of on any level by anybody other than those who love us, and we can extend that to those we love. But really, when it comes down to it, isn't that it?
That's it. That is that long and short of it. You said it right. We have to care for each other, care for other ones, respect everything, including the plants and the whole air, the water, everything that we look at, and understand that, unfortunately, in the case of water, where most of the major rivers in the world right now don't even make it to the ocean.
Yes.
And
yes.
it's affecting so fast. All this information, I urge people to get a hold of the World Watch Institute. Just pull it up on the internet and look at the details that they have on what is the environmental impact on the planet right now, and then take it into consideration. It's not that you might not be able to do anything about the overview of what's happening because there are just so many people on the planet. It's the idea that you can understand the situation and why we have to go through this incredible cleansing that we're coming up to.
Yes. Well, that's a perfect overview. And there was one other thing we touched on last time I wanted to ask you, George, before we let you go. I know you're very, very busy. And that is any news from South America? There was some talk last time there might be a new currency emerging.
Well, they're still working on it. They passed the new currency in Ecuador, and at least they're working on it at this minute. The South American currency, the 5 countries have put in money, and they're working on that also. When I called down there, they haven't got it all put together yet, because again, the dollar has been the kingpin to everybody. Even if they have to take their money, they're going to have to exchange it to the Bank of International Settlements, and then will the Bank of International Settlements accept their thing? So the politics that's involved in creating a new currency is unbelievable.
Well, speaking of International Bank of Settlements, what's up with the Federal Reserve audit? Isn't that supposed to take place right about now? Or is that's not happening now?
No, Bush let them audit it after he gets out of office.
Oh boy. Okay.
Now, when is that out of office? In other words, if they had the election, technically he'd be out of office. He's a lame duck at this point.
So, in other words, that's not happening right now. So the effects of that, although I have been hearing that early October there is going to be some kind of further bump in the market. Do you have anything to say about that, or do you know anything about that?
Well, no. What do you mean? A collapse of the market? It could go either way today. I think it's going. No matter what they do today, we're going to have a kind of evening out for a couple of days. Let it go over the weekend. I mean, it's the beginning of the new year. Yeah, basically, this week.
Fiscally,
and September 30th is the end of it. Now, all debt that whatever debt they're doing is going to be on the new president. The new president, I don't care who they have, it won't be able to take care of this thing. And so what we're looking at, and as far as myself, I said, the meltdown is coming in earnest within the next 90 days or so. I think that if they don't get this thing through, it's not going to affect the average Joe Blow on the street, except for we will no longer be able to import any goods. No foreign currency or country will accept the dollar.
Well, that's huge implications, since we don't produce much ourselves.
Sure, that's the reason why you and I are talking today. And I said I can't give you a definitive action because we're in the same boat as somebody else is. I'm trying to make it so I'm protected in order to get information out to the people, because that's basically what we're doing, is sending information out so people can make discernment of how the issues that they go ahead and try to make so much protection on it. People really are having a hard time, quote, selling anything because banks aren't loaning on them, right?
Right.
And that, believe it or not, houses are 60% of most people's assets.
Right. Yes, indeed.
And all the other assets they have are going away. I mean, a car goes down in value the day you buy it. So does a toaster and everything else. What we're looking at is the only appreciable asset, and that's only because of historical, is gold and silver. So if you can find it, and maybe coin shops or have it, or looking at the paper, I know a lot of people, it is still there. Mm-hmm. It's just a little harder to get, and I suggest people at least store it up. And at the silver conference, just so you know, they're expecting gold to go over $1,200 an ounce before the end of the year, and silver going up to $25, and then probably next year to $100 an ounce, and gold at $2,500 or so.
Well, okay, so we hear that one loud and clear, and we've talked about that each time. So just to kind of recap it, we need to be looking at having cash on hand, starting in large, in small bills, so we can just do basic commerce if we don't have access to funds electronically, etc. in the future. Gold and silver, we just talked about that. That's a thumbs up. Get some of your basic food supplies, your brown rice or whatever can last for a while, because food supplies are going to be going up, and they already have been. You also said if you were going to make an investment that perhaps energy companies would be a reasonable way to go if you are going to invest. And then you said if your appliances are wearing out, is just another practical bit of advice. If the appliances are wearing out, this is a good time to go ahead and replace them, because A, they're really cheap because people can't get money right now, they can't get loans, and B, we're not going to be receiving the same amount of imports, if at all, in the future in these areas. So we need to go ahead and take care of our basic appliances. Anything else you can add to this practical list we've just spoken of?
No, I think you've said everything pretty much. I frankly don't want people in the stock market at all, because there's going to be a point where they shut it down. And like you say, the electronic transfers of funds and stuff are being monitored. You're probably aware that both PayPal, MasterCard, and Visa and all of them will be providing 1099s next year.
I know, I didn't know that.
So what they're doing is tracking all the funds, and there's going to be a point. Well, even Verizon, who handled the MasterCard Visa stuff, was down for a few days.
Yes.
The network of transferring
yes,
all
I
those
remember
things.
that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's a possibility when you go over to your lucky bank and say, "Well, I'm just going to transfer your digits," since there was nothing there in the first place but more digits.
Right.
What happens when that all shuts down, and what happens when the internet shuts down?
Right. Well, that would be that would create quite a difficulty for everyone. If there were ever going to be a panicky moment, it would be that moment.
You got it.
So oil's been dropping because they're assuming there's going to be a lack of demand because of the economy. Should we be expecting a drop?
There is a lack of demand, but frankly, the production costs are between $80 and $90 a barrel right now. That's to get it.
Right.
Most of we're still on a declining basis of all the oil wells we drilled. I mean, oil's not coming back. It's not a question of having the availability of oil. It's the cost and the extraction to get it.
So do you see the prices remaining about here around the levels they are currently for a while? Right now we're at about $3.50 to $3.75 a gallon at the pumps, or do you expect to see it rise?
No, I expect the things to stay the same for a short while because of the distribution. I mean, there's 42 gallons in a barrel.
Mm-hmm.
And what is happening is the availability. There's believe it or not, a lot of gas stations still don't have gasoline just from that storm that happened 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
But then not only that was it the oil distribution, but it was also the refineries, which were shut down they were shut down for 5 days, and it takes 5 days to restart them. Then it's the distribution. Meanwhile, people are just not traveling, using as much.
Right.
And the other thing is, the other countries are now looking at the dollar again. How do we acquire it? I mean, if you're going to export it, the oil cost right now, the way that companies look at it, the out of the ground is around $80 a barrel. That was the availability. Now there's more oil all over the place, but it may cost $120 or $140 a barrel.
So you think ultimately it'll start inching back upward?
Oh yeah, it has to, because China and India are acquiring all these vehicles and stuff,
right.
and they're taking everything, and we're taking our oil from Canada and Mexico. That's the largest suppliers. Again, 30% is all we're producing here,
mm-hmm.
and most of the wells we're doing gasification. That's putting gas into the ground to help push up the oil out, water flooding them. I used to drill oil wells myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is a problem. We're just running out of the natural resource again. And oil happens to be the only thing that is easily transportable. It's an energy that's transportable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's all these other things that like ethanol, that's a killer. It costs more to do. And it's an environmental killer. It's a killer on the vehicles we have. The only safe thing we have is oil. We're looking at other things, but the cost to do it. And the the car companies are taking advantage of people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can go buy one of the new hybrid cars, for instance, but they
mm-hmm.
don't tell you that the battery pack has to be replaced in a couple of years, and it's $12,000.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll find out about that. We have a Prius, and we've hit over 100,000 miles. It's been, thus far, the most reliable car I've ever had in my entire life, the least to maintain, but we haven't heard anything yet on the battery. It seems that theirs are doing pretty well so far. I haven't even heard what happens there, so I guess we're in line to find out.
Yeah, but you got a good one, because if you got 100,000 miles on it, it'll bless you, because a lot of other people are having troubles, and they're having, that's one of the things they're looking at. They're looking at new battery.
Yeah.
They're looking at a lot of new technologies. People in New Mexico are using basically enzymes in order to create an oil type derivative to run the cars.
Well, there's no shortage of creativity and alternative energy sources out there, no doubt about it. And hopefully with all of this that's happening in the world, it's going to force those to the surface. So this part of the game anyway ends.
I do thank you again for having me on. If
thank you, George.
Want to go to nohoax.com. That's my website.
Yes.
Look at some of the articles we have. It kind of spells out some of the problems we're in.
Okay, NOHOAX, nohoax.com. George, thank you so much for taking the time for us out of your very, very busy schedule right now. And we'll talk to you again in a few weeks, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, George. Bye.
Bye-bye.